Lifebrary, a podcast dedicated to your personal story. A story which is not merely a collection of events, but a powerful chronicle that encapsulates the essence of who you are. Understanding the importance of your personal story is to recognize the significance of your voice in the grand symphony of life. Let's get connected.
So, this is my story. I think people that know me now think that I've had a pretty normal life, pretty good, which I do now. It didn't start out that way. Um, my very first memories aren't until I'm about 5 years old. Um, and the very first memory I have is in the summer when my mom and dad split up and my dad moved out. He moved into a house with like some of his friends, and I didn't really see him much for a few months. I don't remember what led up to it. I don't remember anything about that time other than he was gone a few months. Um, we went over, my brother and I went over there a couple of times to visit him, but I don't remember too much. And then he and my mom got back together. And so he came home. And that's when I remember a lot of the arguing and physical fighting between my parents started. Um, my mom started drinking a lot at that point, and she also started looking to me as like her confidant and best friend. So I was like 5 and 6 years old, and she was telling me how she was pretty sure that my dad had gotten one of his many girlfriends pregnant and that I was going to have a brother or sister. Um, and that was a story that she told me throughout my childhood. And to this day, I don't know whether I do or not. Um, I've never really looked into it and not really sure that I want to. Um, So it was also about this time that my mom went to work nights. As far back as I can remember, my mom has been a factory worker, and she worked super hard, super long hours because my dad was really very selfish. He had a very good job. He was in management of a wire company, but he spent all of his money on brand new Cadillacs and new boats and Harley Davidsons. And um, my mom had to pay all the utilities in the house, all the food in the house, all the school supplies, clothes, whatever, for my brother and I. So she went back to work nights. I was 6, my brother was 5. We would come home from school and we would have a couple of hours where we were home alone. I had to watch him. And then my dad would get home. Usually, I think it was supposed to be like 4 or 5. Sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. Quite often, when he'd come home, it would just be real quick. He would shower, he would change, and he would leave. And we would be alone until my mom got home from work. Sometimes he would get home before she did so that she wouldn't know that he was gone. And I vividly recall one time I was terrified of the dark and terrified of storms. And he was getting ready to go out. He had showered, he had put on, his good going out clothes. And I started crying and I asked him to stay because it was thunder and lightning outside and it was getting dark. And um, he looked at me and said, "Big girls don't cry." And he walked out of the house. And a little bit later, I remember the electricity going out in the house. And this was back in the days when, there were no cell phones. It was the good old house phones, and you needed electricity for those push buttons to light up. And it took me numerous tries to get the right numbers to call my mom at work to say, "I'm scared and dad's not here." And I finally got through and she came home. Of course, that's a double-edged sword. Yes, I was glad she was home and I wasn't alone in the storm at night with my brother. But that meant when my dad got home, there was a big fight between the two of them. So then you feel guilty for that because my dad thought nothing of, slapping my mom, pushing her, throwing something at her. Um, and sometimes she would fight back and throw something at him, but usually it was just, her crying and going into her room, and my dad just stomping out of the house and leaving for maybe a day, maybe a week. You never knew. Um, so I learned pretty early on that it didn't do any good to cry or ask my dad for what I needed. He was going to do what he wanted to do. Um, we knew growing up that my dad had girlfriends. Um, he made no secrets of it. My mom didn't make secrets of it. So that was awkward, because you realize that this isn't the norm. My friends at school, they didn't have their mom and dad at home watching TV and a girlfriend coming over to watch a movie with them. That was unusual. We would go out on the boat fishing once in a while with my dad, and it would be us and my mom and my dad and his girlfriend. And that was supposed to just be the norm, a good family fun day. A little bit odd. It was odd when he had one girlfriend for most of my childhood. I do remember her name was Libby. Um, and then he started seeing somebody else. So then my mom and Libby would talk, and they would, be all mad at him and trying to figure out how to get him to come back to them. But yet my mom would always say how she hated Libby. And I know Libby didn't like my mom. And it was just really, really weird. We were supposed to welcome this woman into our house when she came, like she was a part of the family, but yet we knew she didn't belong there, and we certainly didn't want her there. Little side story, years later, when my brother became an adult, he was like 18 or 19. By this point, my dad and Libby had broken up, and my brother started dating Libby and ended up living with her for a couple of years. So, another awkward, awkward time. Um, so yeah, there was that. Um, and one thing about the physical violence in my home, it was never directed at my brother and I. It was just between my mom and dad. And they would say horrible things to each other. And like I said, my dad would hit my mom and push her. And um, sometimes it got bad. And as much as deep down I knew that wasn't right, my best friend, her stepdad, did the same thing with her mom. I was at her house once, and her stepdad threw her mom down a flight of stairs and she broke a couple ribs. Another friend of ours that lived a few houses away, her dad beat her mom. So even though it's not right, it's kind of that's how I grew up, and it seemed the norm. Um, so, it was just weird. So I hid that from everybody outside of my neighborhood because, the people at school, they seemingly had these great lives and parents that get along, and not so much with our household or my friends in the neighborhood. Um, there was, like I said, around the time my dad came back from the separation, my mom started drinking heavily. Both of them drank a lot. They also smoked marijuana, which certainly didn't help anything in the house, but it was getting to the point where the minute my mom would get home from work, she would drink until she passed out. Um, I remember one time I was 6 and I was in the school play, and I was extremely shy as a kid. I didn't talk to people I didn't know. I tried to, just kind of hide in the background. But I got the lead role as the princess in our first grade play. And it was a big deal. And I had memorized not only my lines, but just about every line in that play. And we were so excited because, our family got to come and watch. And as a special treat, when the play ended, we could leave with our parents if we wanted to. We didn't have to stay the rest of the day. So I was all excited because my mom and my step grandmother were coming. And we did the play and it was great. And all of a sudden, everybody's leaving with their parents. And I look around and mine's nowhere to be found. I had to stay at school the rest of the afternoon because my mom and my step grandmother wanted to go out to the bar and have an afternoon of drinking to themselves. So I think there was maybe me and one other kid left in my class that day. So that was a bit sad. I wasn't super happy. But that's just the way it was. Um, Around this time, my mom got a job working days, which was really good because, like I said, I hated being home alone. I hated having to watch my brother, hated the dark. So that was good in that I wasn't home alone with my brother, but she was now drinking from the minute she got home at like 3:30 in the afternoon, and by like 5:30, she would be passed out. So I was still having to take care of my brother, who was, a little over a year younger than I was. I'd have to make him dinner and, make sure he goes to bed, try to get him to do his homework. I'd have to do my homework. Um, every once in a while, my mom would, be in the middle of her drinking and decided, oh, I need to go to the store for something. So in the car we'd go, and she would be driving all over the road. I was always afraid that we were going to crash. Um, Even, at 7, 8, 9 years old, you knew that this is not a good idea. You really shouldn't be driving. But, at that time, what could you do? Um, my dad was also home a lot less. There were times that he would be gone a couple of weeks. Nobody would hear from him. He would be staying with one of his various girlfriends. Sometimes he would take trips to Canada. Nobody knew, he'd go fishing, whatever. But it was always better for us, at least I thought so, when he wasn't home, because there wasn't the yelling, there wasn't the fighting. We just always kind of lived in fear of the next big fight. Occasionally, if he was in a good mood, he would like keep me out of school or keep my brother out of school and bring us to work with him. And that was always fun because he'd take us to McDonald's for lunch and, we got to spend the day with dad and he'd be super nice. And, I just grew up thinking if only it was like this all the time. But it never lasted long. And I think it was maybe 3 times I can remember him doing that as I was growing up. I do remember, well, most of my childhood memories, yes, I do have some happy ones, but they're always kind of ruined at the end by something that happened after the good time. We'd go to my grandparents' house to celebrate a birthday or something, and we'd have a great time. And then we would get home, and my parents would fight about something. My mom looked at somebody wrong, or my dad just needed to go, and my mom didn't want him to. And um, so I really cannot think of a time where I had a good memory, a good day from start to finish. School was my refuge, though it was during the school day that I found myself most at peace. I I loved school. I loved learning. Um, I was very good at school, probably because I put all my energy into it. Um, then I remember my next big memory is I was in 7th grade, and my mom told my brother and I that she was pregnant, which should be happy news. Except, my dad said, if you have this baby, I am leaving. Now, my brother and I were all like, so let him leave, mom. You already, do everything yourself. You don't need him. And she said, well, I can't handle a new baby on my own. And so, of course, there I am saying, okay, well, when I get home from school, you can go to work, at night, and I'll take care of the baby and I'll take care of Randy and everything will be fine. And so she's, said, yeah, that might work. We might be able to do that if your dad leaves. Um, and then my dad actually took us all on a little family day trip. We went to a drag race. We used to go to the drag races once in a while. And I remember my mom falling down drunk. She needed help walking that day. And my heart sank because even at that age, I knew you can't be pregnant and drinking like this. this baby is not going to be born healthy or well, and you can't bring another child like this into the world, and I tried so hard to keep her away from beer and trying to keep her, sober, and she couldn't do it. And looking back, that certainly wasn't my job to do it. In the end, she did end up having an abortion, and she spent the next 30 plus years regretting it. She talked about it often. Um, Her sister had had a baby that was due right around the time my mom's would have been. And so that was a constant reminder of that time in her life. Um, like I said, she went to her grave regretting that decision. Um, my dad never once talked about it. Um, it certainly didn't keep him home afterwards. He was still out and about doing his thing. In fact, it was shortly after that they had one of their biggest fights. I was not home for it, thank goodness. I had been sleeping at a friend's house. I came home the next day, and my mother was beaten so badly. She had two black eyes. One side of her face was caved in. She never went to the doctor. Her face was always flat on one side after that. Um, so he had, broken bones within her face. Um, there was blood all over the house. I mean, it was really bad. And the next day, my dad came and picked up my brother and I, and for the first time in our lives, he took us school clothes shopping, and he let us buy whatever we wanted, and he took us school supply shopping, and we got everything we wanted. Like that was supposed to make up for everything. And my mom put on her sunglasses and didn't miss a day of work and told everybody that she felt. And I kind of doubt everyone believed it, but at that point, nobody was going to call the police. Nobody was going to say anything. So she dealt with it. Um, at this point, my dad also, shortly after that, um, decided he was going to take me with him one evening to go buy drugs. He went and we went to the one place, and I believe he just got marijuana there, but there were scales and baggies and drugs and just all sorts of stuff. And then we went to a bar where he got some drinks, and then we went someplace else to get some pills or something. Well, then he was like really out of it. So I was like 13, never driven a car, and he hands me the keys and says, "You have to drive me home." It's like midnight. We're on a highway. There's a lot of traffic. And I'm like, Okay. So that's what I did. I drove him home. And so then it was a couple more times he did that. I guess he liked the idea of having a driver. Um, and then I think he could really tell that I did not like it. I did not approve of it. I didn't like those people. They creeped me out. So he stopped, thank God. Um, but since he knew I could drive, from that point on, if he or my mom wanted something from the store, they would just hand me the car keys and say, "Hey, go get me this, go get me that." And I did. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened there, but very interesting. I've been independent and taking care of myself for as long as I can remember. Um, and now that I'm obviously an adult, I think back and I wish I could have had a childhood. I wish I could have been carefree, having fun, not having to take care of myself, not having to take care of my brother, not having to take care of my mother. Um, I guess that's why I still take care of everybody in my life, which luckily the people in my life now are good people and they're loving people. But I always knew my mother loved me, but the alcohol took control of her. And she wasn't able to get out of that. And she wasn't able to take care of herself, let alone anybody else. My dad, I still have issues with. My dad, he was selfish. I found out my mom died almost 7 years ago. And at her memorial, everyone's telling stories. And I found out that, well, first, I should say, my mom and dad got married very young. My dad was 16, my mom was 19 when they got married. I was born 2 years later. I'm the oldest. Um, but I found out at my mom's memorial that my aunt had gone to her senior prom. This was after my mom and dad were married. And my dad walks in as a date for somebody else to the same prom. And I said, well, what did mom say? And she said, well, I never told her. I didn't want to hurt her. And I thought, well, maybe if somebody told her right off the bat, they had only been married a short time, maybe something would have changed. I would think. But instead they knew all along that my dad was dating other women, well, girls really, because he was still a teenager and they were teenagers, and nobody told her. And that behavior just continued their whole marriage, up until I was about 20, when he found somebody that apparently settled him down. And they've been married ever since. And as far as I know, he does not go out without her, and they're happy. Um, but my issues with him is my mom, she always showed that she loved us. She always told us she loved us. She always tried to give us what we needed. My dad didn't. It was all about him. And if we fit into his schedule that day, or, fit into his time, okay, fine. But he wasn't going to do something that we liked just because we wanted to do it. Um, my dad's never apologized for anything. He's never made me feel like I was an important part of his life. Um, I had not spoken to my dad for almost 4 years. I ended up calling him last night. I don't know why. I did. And I really felt nothing towards this man. I don't feel hatred, but I don't really love him either. I mean, I just kind of feel nothing. It was pretty much like talking to a stranger. And I think I'm at the point where I just don't need that sort of person in my life. Um, I will say that growing up the way I did, all I wanted to do was get out of that house. And I didn't see it at the time, or maybe because I thought everything was so normal, since that's how I was, that's how my best friend was, that I got married very young. I got married at 18 to a man who was sometimes physically abusive, mostly verbally and mentally abusive. Um, Situation, very much like my parents, just very unhappy and very bad. And we had 3 kids. Luckily, I did finally get to the point where I said, I can do this on my own. I don't need him. And I did. And it was at that point that I really feel that my life began. It was hard. I had 3 kids. I had never worked, but I was making my own decisions. I was raising my children, and I was happy. And it was after this that I found someone who is so unlike my dad or my first husband. He's amazing. And he's the person that I wish I had known from the beginning. You know, it, he gives me everything that everybody should have. He gives me security and safety and love and respect. And I'm so thankful for that. But I will say, like, my dad and I have had periods where we've gotten along. And it was when I was engaged and we were planning the wedding. My dad was so excited. And he was picking out songs to dance to at my wedding. And I was excited. And then about a month before the wedding, I get an RSVP card from him and my stepmom saying, "Will not be attending." Never called, never said why, just will not be attending. There was another time that I have a granddaughter, and we were going down. He lives on the Gulf Coast. We were going down there for a week visit, and he was so excited. He was going to meet his great granddaughter, who was 2 at the time. So excited. Couple weeks before, all communication stopped. He wouldn't answer calls. He wouldn't answer texts. We get down there, nothing. So we made that whole trip, and he never met his great granddaughter. He does not know that he has a great grandson right now. He hasn't seen his grandchildren in 25 years. Um, I haven't seen him in probably 8 years, 9 years. Um, I just kind of feel like he reaped what he sowed. He's probably, just going to have my stepmom, and that's it. And, what can you do? Um, but yeah, I do have some anger sometimes that I wasn't allowed to just be a kid. I wasn't able to do after school activities because I lived kind of away from everybody else at the school. And I didn't have a parent that could pick me up after like a team practice or take me to a meet because she'd probably be passed out. So I had to miss out on a lot of that stuff. I didn't bring people from school home. Um, but both because I never knew if my dad was going to be there, if there was going to be a fight. I didn't know if my mom would be halfway sober, and my mom never cleaned. Our house was disgusting. Um, so if it wasn't my best friend who lived in the neighborhood and had grown up with me, nobody else came to my house. I just couldn't let them there. Um, so I missed out on a lot. And so when I had kids, I got them involved in everything. I ran myself ragged. It's funny how we try to make up for our own childhoods with them. Um, I'm glad they seem to enjoy it. They're happy, but yeah, that's kind of my story. I have always pretty much been on my own up until I met my husband. We've been together almost 18 years now, and that is the first time in my life that I've ever felt completely loved and completely safe and secure. So that's it.